when I look at the refugee conversations in Europe, and when I look at the refugee conversations in UK, and when I look at the refugee conversations where, for me, in some of the debates I've had, I have argued that the conflict of the other, the discussion around the other, discussion about Britain being swamped, could easily have made a net contribution for people to make this rather major, without prejudice, as opposed to Brexit, major decision for Brexit to happen, which I'm sure now most people, at least according to the official figures, are regretting. But the situation is worse now that in the last several years, this matter has been substantially politicized, and that the main political parties have turned this into football, just like they turned so-called single mothers into football, just like they turned at some stage, you and me would possibly know that in the 90s, issues of sexuality into football, and that they turned things as basic as crime, regardless of the underlying elements, into football, and then race, as it were. It's one of the most appalling decisions ever. It's I don't know if in 1987 I ended up in London as I did in that cold space, with the shock that I had, the confusion that I had been subjected to, and the uncertainties, and that I would, instead of being told that things will be okay for me, I need to be able to start my life, which I must say, and this is very, very clear, I must say that whatever I was being given in Britain was not good enough for me, because, I mean, it was not my choice, but I appreciated it, and I appreciate it today, because that's for the record. So if I could do that at the time and then be told that, well, Joseph, instead of waiting for your exceptional leave to remain to be renewed every year, we are preparing to take you to Rwanda because you're not welcome here, or perhaps we're taking you to Rwanda either because Britain is full or because you're undeserving. So it would be very interesting. No, I think it's something that campaigns need to continue. I think it's racist. I think is for Britain that survived slavery, for Britain that survived, and many of us forgave people like the Margaret Thatchers who called the Nelson Mandelas terrorists, and amongst the first people to go and boast in the streets of South Africa was Margaret Thatcher's own son. I think it's extremely insensitive that the British government is able to think about that policy. Now, the one thing which I must say for the record, which is extreme irony, and that the current British Prime Minister and the very radical Home Secretary who replaces Patel, without prejudice, 3 people of color, 3 Asian guys, all of whom ironically have experience and history from our East Africa, to go to Britain and become leaders and forget their past, forget their history, is extremely insensitive, and I think they must be ashamed of themselves. That said, I think it's the responsibility of all citizens of Britain and residents of Britain to take a position and say no to this. And I think whoever made that policy should be made to be paid for it, either through formal legal means or definitely through a political process. I'm not quite sure whether they've not been born into the propaganda around refugees. And as I said, leading to Brexit, you find young, without prejudice, immigrant people arguing that, well, I also want to secure my lot because this Eastern European or those others are coming, to take over our jobs or our houses. And I remember I had to tell a young lady, professional lady, I was in London at the time, that, if those of us who came, in the 80s, took the view that you're holding, you guys who came in the year 2000 plus would not have come. No, I think the specifics about my experience in UK is that I think there was much more apparent racism around the time that I came than now. Now that makes a slight difference, but in terms of the stigma around refugees, I think it's worse. Some of us, if you guys want to change policy constructively in Britain, and this is important for the refugee week, let Britain, meaning London and Washington, the political elite, I'm not talking about the ordinary people, let the guys in charge of foreign policy in London and Washington and Paris and Moscow and possibly Beijing, stop creating climates that foment and create refugees. So I remember telling these people that, no, I don't want to be in Britain. I don't want to stay in Britain. I did not come to Britain. I escaped to Britain. If you want, because the asylum question had now become a conversation, we shall bring down the numbers. So no, deal with the underlying causes, deal with the dictatorships, deal with the situation. Moreover, most of the situations are created from London. The ordinary average person in the streets of UK have no clue what some of those things are going on. So as you continue having this conversation, I think it's very important in churches, in spaces, in communities, in schools. These are the debates and conversations that we need to be able to have. And so beyond that, we are also ordinary normal people with families and ordinary normal people who get the shocks. As I said, I entered the streets of London. Some of the things that I saw are things I could not imagine would be happening in Britain. By the time then you begin to go through the process in which you just merely have to convince somebody that I am somebody who's escaping from a brutal regime that possibly, your taxes and dime and policies are holding him there. People have gone through huge, huge, huge trauma.